Throughout the past 110 years, the face of building materials has continued to evolve. We're here for a lifetime of living. This is Brickworks. More than brick, and more than just building products, we are a foundation for today's lifestyle and a leader for today's style. We manufacture a wide range of building products. Products like no other. Local and international innovation. Sourced from around the world to exceed customer expectations. Distinctive and luxurious products. Beautiful products that stand the test of time. Building inspiration and innovation with an unmatched standing of style. This is Brickworks.
Good evening. On behalf of Engineers Australia, I'm delighted to welcome you all to the Infrastructure Thought Leaders webinar on Shaping the Future of Construction. I'm Ryan Skinner, National Manager Client Relationships with Engineers Australia, coming to you from Brickworks Design Studio in Brisbane. Firstly, in keeping with our traditions, Engineers Australia acknowledges the traditional owners of the land and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and community. We pay our respects to their cultures and to elders past, present and emerging. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that tonight's seminar is being hosted with our industry partner, Brickworks Building Products. They are one of the world's largest and most diverse building material manufacturers. The company has built an enduring reputation with their customers and are loved for their innovation, professionalism, and dependable products and services. As Brickworks Building Products expands globally, they continually foster and advance their products and brand, continuing to lead the way through design, style, innovation, sustainability, and collaboration. With a broad product portfolio and manufacturing and sales facilities across both Australia and North America, Brickworks is uniquely placed to service the demands of the building industry. We'll now hear from Daniel Schoenwald, General Manager for Austral Masonry, Queensland.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Daniel Schoenwald and I'm here tonight on behalf of Brickworks to welcome you to tonight's great debate. Brickworks is a proud sponsor of Engineers Australia, who we have collaborated with now for over 4 years to bring you events like this. Tonight we will hear from prominent figures throughout the building industry with backgrounds in architecture, building and construction, engineering, as well as government and policy. The beauty of this diverse group is that all panellists offer unique perspectives on the issues being discussed and all offer solutions based on the challenge as it's seen by many within their chosen profession. That in essence is the goal of this event, to bring out unique and differing perspectives on key issues, rousing discussion and creative thinking. Brickworks is proud to bring you this event and in particular discussing the future of construction with you as it resonates with our driving ethos. At Brickworks, we make beautiful products that last forever. From our vast range that includes clay bricks, roof tiles, masonry blocks, pavers, retaining walls and precast panels, we seek to finely craft products that last now and into the future, just like the projects in which they are used. Our products are designed to stand the test of time, just like our bricks and ceramic facade systems, which are offered with a 100-year warranty. On behalf of Brickworks, thank you for joining us tonight, and we hope that you enjoy the conversation that ensues.
I'd now like to introduce you to our facilitators for tonight's discussion. Stephen Burton, Partner for Construction and Infrastructure, and Troy Lewis, National Head of Construction and Infrastructure Disputes. Both are from Holding Redlich. Holding Redlich have offices in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and Cairns, providing a complete range of legal services for clients of all sizes, including many of Australia's largest public and private companies and all levels of government. They provide solutions tailored to clients' needs, underpinned by the very best legal thinking and expert industry knowledge. Please join me in welcoming Troy Lewis and Stephen Burton.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Troy Lewis. This is Stephen Burton. I'm the National Head of the Construction Infrastructure Group at Holding Redlich. Stephen is one of my co-partners specialising in project delivery. Stephen and I head up a team of 10 specialist construction, infrastructure and projects partners and 30 lawyers who are situated Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria, but also practising in relation to all states and territories of Australia and also overseas. We're delighted to be here and able to run this panel discussion again for Engineers Australia, having done it last year, which was a great success, and we're delighted to have everyone with us remotely tonight. I'd now like to introduce our panellists for this evening. Please welcome, first of all, Yvonne Pengilly. During her 30-year career, Ms Pengilly has worked in all facets of the construction industry, including trade contracting, contract administration, project management, design and development management. Ms Pengilly is also the current Assistant Commissioner, Technical for the Queensland Building and Construction Commission, having been appointed to that role in August 2019. Please join with me in welcoming Yvonne. Joining Yvonne tonight is Nick Barker. Nick is Robert Bird Group's Global Infrastructure and Construction Engineering Leader, which sees him critically involved in identifying and delivering engineering solutions for globally significant projects. Nick has over 38 years experience, fueled by an enduring passion for developing construction solutions for iconic buildings and major infrastructure projects all over the world. Could I please also welcome Simon Pacusa. Simon is a Chartered Structural Engineer and a Director of MPN Consulting here in Brisbane. Simon has over 30 years of specialist experience in the design of concrete, steel and composites for a wide range of building products with a variety of delivery and construction methods. Also joining the panel tonight will be Paul Easingwood. Paul has worked across a diverse range of sectors on major significant projects both locally and overseas. His expertise includes rail, industrial and process engineering, leading multidisciplinary mixed-use project teams, conversion and reuse of heritage-listed structures, facade design, innovative architectural engineering, structural surveys, investigation and forensic engineering, and multi-storey structures. Could we also please welcome Richard Coulson? Richard joined Cox in 2000 and is the National Director of Cox based in Brisbane. He's undertaken the most diversified of portfolios of any projects of any of the directors in the Queensland studio. He was the project architect for the Singapore Management University Headquarters Towers and has extended his commercial building expertise with the Energex headquarters here at Newstead. What you may not know is this was the first commercial building in Queensland to be awarded the 6-star Green Star as-built status. And lastly, to round off our exceptional panel tonight, could you please join with me in welcoming Paul Milne. Paul is a civil engineer. He has held many senior leadership and management positions in large multinational engineering and contracting organisations. He has a significant demonstrated experience in major project delivery, operations and maintenance, and is currently responsible for project delivery across Laing O'Rourke's core infrastructure and building works, as well as its integration with Laing O'Rourke's subsidiaries. I'm sure you'll all agree with me that is an exceptional panel, and we look forward to sharing their insights, expertise and specialties with you tonight. Good evening everyone and welcome. For tonight's debate, what we will do is we will initially pose a number of questions to members of our very illustrious and esteemed panel, who will then provide their specialist comments and feedback in relation to a number of those questions. Then, following the completion of those discussions, Stephen Burton, one of my co-partners at Holding Redlich, will then facilitate a question and answer from questions that come through from the audience. If I could just please ask for any questions which you would like to send through to use the comments function, and if you send them through, Stephen will then go through the large number of questions that I'm sure we will have, and then pose a selection of them to our panel throughout the evening. I am sure with the large number of questions, we unfortunately won't be able to get to all of them, but we can assure you we will tonight try to make sure we get a very broad sample size of the questions to hopefully address as many of the topics which you send through as possible. So without further ado, I'll pose the first of our questions this evening, and the first of those questions is to Paul from Laing O'Rourke, and that question is this: a lot has certainly happened since our last great debate. How do you see the role of engineers in the post-pandemic recovery? Paul.
Yeah, thanks. It does seem that every response that you hear to the pandemic involves investment in our industry, which is fantastic. So engineers are going to form a fundamental part of that, not just the engineering, the design and the building, but also they are going to be a central part of rebuilding this economy. So incredibly important. So as an industry, the challenge for us is to work a lot closer with government, and it's certainly to rebuild confidence in the industry as a sector. And one of the things we need to do is admit where we have deficiencies and challenges. And I would say productivity over the decades has not improved to the extent that it should, that it has done in other industries. You see innovation pushing ahead in other industries, but not as much in the construction industry. We're big users of energy. We use a lot of landfill. And mental health within the young men in our industry is running at levels far above industry average. So to take on this challenge, we need capacity and we need capability, and a huge part of our population is not adequately represented within the industry, and that's our females. So we still are failing to attract and retain enough females in the industry. So as engineers, I've just outlined a number of challenges there. They're not simple, but they are challenges. Because the big thing about COVID for me is it's been a terrible thing worldwide and in Australia and particularly Victoria. But if we can't push ahead and change the industry as we respond to this unprecedented infrastructure expenditure, if we can't respond as engineers in the resilient way that we can, then we'll just keep doing what we've always done and miss this great opportunity.
Can I maybe throw it then to any of the other panel members for any comments, different views, competing views, similar views?
Over the years, I mean, we've seen the efficiencies in industries like agriculture, manufacturing and retail. And as a society, we've accepted those changes quite openly. But to make the changes, Paul, that you're talking about in construction, it's very difficult, isn't it? They're not easily made because it affects a lot of people. It affects the environment we live in immediately. So we need to look at that.
Yeah, I think that's the important part about partnership with government. It has to happen right at the central point where the funding is going to come from, and it is difficult. But we're engineers. You know, difficult's why we joined the industry, and I think we're made for taking on difficult challenges, and we should.
Yvonne?
Yeah, I think engineers are critical in that as industry sustainability is probably the key factor to consumer confidence. And I think for Queensland, we believe that as we're a registered engineering. So we have legislation that dictates and clearly outlines the guidelines for that. So, and that's like 90 years of having actual regulation of the Professional Engineers Act. I think additionally to that, it's that by having that, the industry of engineering really is able to provide integrity around systems and structures, whether that's directly or indirectly related to construction. I think the engineer's position is always going to be around considering compliance and fit for purpose considerations. So I think that leads into industry sustainability and consumer confidence. And whether we look at it as the engineer's role in materials or structure or premises or whatever that is that they're doing, I think they have the ability to ensure that that consumer confidence is driven as we come out of the post-pandemic recovery. And I just think they easily lead in this area.
So really, you're talking there, Yvonne, about a real opportunity to be at the forefront and driving it as much as anything.
I believe so. I mean, we've got a great registration system in Queensland, and it covers all engineers, not just construction. So I think there is real opportunity there.
I think we've got an inherent responsibility to set a good example as well, be it in sustainability or mental health, and Paul touched on. There's going to be a lot of money put out by the government on infrastructure projects, and we can demonstrate good practice, how to use the tools we've got around us, all of the online and the BIM and the model sharing sort of elements that we've got. We can do it in an efficient, sustainable way.
Yeah. So
one other point too is that engineers are very good at solving problems with multiple inputs. I mean, we tend to do that unconsciously, but maybe we need to just articulate that a lot more. What Paul said at the beginning there was that we're trying to, there's all these competing things, we haven't quite pulled it all together, but we're actually quite good at that. Yep. If we actually think about that and tell other people that we're good at that. Young kids that go through uni are trained in that. That's why they're smart kids. So maybe we should articulate that a lot more to people and actually not be scared of jumping a little bit beyond our discipline or seeing other problems beneath that discipline and providing solutions.
pushing the envelope a bit, thinking outside the box, and taking the social license, I suppose, that comes with the money that's going to come into the industry, and looking at sort of some creative ways to solve those things.
People that we don't just fill formulas out. We can actually see systems and interactions and all those sorts of soft skills.
And is that a message that you think is maybe lost a bit sometimes?
Well, that's what we try to do as a practice.
Mm.
You know, I mean, there's some of the points in some of your later questions, and that's you're trying to see things holistically. You're trying to see things with all their competing things and find a good solution that gives somebody something of value.
I'm quite hard on myself and maybe a little bit hard on the industry. I mean, I'm 30 years in, and unfortunately, I don't think we build that much differently than we did 30 years ago, and that's not right. And we talk about huge investment. We talk about capacity and capability, and to attract young people to this industry, I think you need to modernise, and you need to look at different techniques. And the digital engineering tools that we have now that we deploy, but probably not widely enough. Those are things that I think attract younger people. I think there are things that also attract more females into the industry as well. So, we just can't keep doing it the way we've always done it, and 70 billion plus worth of investment. If we do deliver it in that manner, I don't think that's the answer.
And why do you think that is the case, that we're still doing it in very similar ways as to how we have for some time now?
Because it's hard. It's hard to get it right all the time.
Yeah.
You've got to get it right all the time.
It comes down to the materials that we use. I mean, the materials haven't changed. We're still using concrete, steel, and
Clay.
heavy pieces of that make up a structure.
Yep.
Needs to be moved with other big pieces of equipment. So
Yep.
this whole idea of changing the way we build or change the way we design it's a big momentum thing, and often there's an investment that's required to get to a new way of building that not many companies are prepared to take.
Yeah, an upfront investment. Yep.
No, and I know Laing O'Rourke's had that approach for many years. Invest in the way you build, And from my background with Robert Bird Group, we've always looked at ways to make design more efficient, so then you can make building more efficient. But it has to be all locked together. You can't have one without the other. Everyone has to be working in some sort of environment where we're trying to do that. And maybe it goes back to the universities even. Should the universities be teaching people to a different approach? But I think until we get different things, like we're surrounded here by bricks, so should we be using more bricks to make our houses more efficient or more insulated? There's lots of things we could be doing, and it's a challenge, I think.
Yep. Yep.
Because something's old and it's been used for centuries, doesn't necessarily
mean it's bad.
bad.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Maybe we use it more effectively. Maybe we design it to be more durable or more adaptable.
Yep.
So that you can use a building for 100 years
Yep.
with different uses. That's a big thing we're looking at now. There's a lot of reuse of buildings. Reuse, repurposing. Even in retail in the last year, look at the large majors that have fallen over. So what do we do with that space? We're looking at a lot of those sorts of things. What do you do with an old Target? What do you do with places where you had lots of distribution and now there's just people instead of things moving through there?
Yep.
That could well filter through to commercial space. And
Absolutely.
We do a lot of reclap of facades which have reached end of life.
Yep.
With what we've gone through in the last 9 months or so, that could be how do we repurpose that space? I don't know. There's initiatives to look at city gardens and growing vegetables on some levels, and how do we activate potentially vacant commercial premises going forward? So.
Yep.
Yeah. I think the point you made earlier, we at Langerock, we certainly look at the design for manufacturing assembly as a process because we looked at manufacturing as an industry that needs to be copied and replicated as much as possible on construction sites, and it's certainly something that we've had some success with. And it's not just the success in the schedule or the cost, it's also the safety.
Yep.
You've not got so many people working on some of these high-rise and city centres working on top of each other, literally, constrained spaces, etc. So that's certainly something we've invested in a big way, and we've certainly seen the benefits of it.
And some industries obviously do manufacturing really well. Like, I always look at the car industry.
Yeah.
It's a bit of an example, it produces a product of the highest quality. Even an inexpensive car is still a very high quality product. And if you can take that sort of philosophy into building with more pre-assembly, you can get higher quality with less on-site labour, less risk of less risks to workers. Definite flow-on effect.
If there's nothing else then from anyone, we'll jump to the next question. So this one's for Simon from MPN Consulting. It is argued that the demand for reducing costs sits in direct conflict with delivering quality outcomes. What are the best means to achieve both goals? And I think this is probably a question everybody would love to know the answer for.
A view on this, because a couple of things. The imperative to reduce cost is real. Pressure on our fees is real.
Yep.
The pressure to be more efficient is real. So I suppose it depends whether you're thinking about design costs, which is what we are concerned about, or whether we're talking about construction and delivery costs, which is perhaps what Bill would be thinking about, or maybe if you're an owner, you're thinking about life cycle costs. What does it mean instead of, well, the building's finished, what happens in 20 years' time? What are we doing? Can we repurpose it? Does it cost us too much to run? So at a project level, I suppose, whichever one of those people is pushing hardest will probably determine the outcome. So in doing that, we then have to address all these different sorts of design issues that address each of those things. From our experience, I suppose, we're a small firm, we're about 40 people. We have used more into the digital space, like most consultants. We share, we use digital workflows to try and streamline what we're doing, to try and control what we're doing, and also to try and supervise our younger engineers to see what they're doing. But at the same time, we've found with all this model sharing, quite useful things in pulling out the old rules from AS 1250, slenderness rules, so that people can actually step out of these models and see, does that look right? Is the form right? Is the scale right? And I tell engineers, the last thing you want to do is go to site, look at something and think, oh, holy, that doesn't look right. It can look chunky, but if it doesn't look right. So that kind of training we find does streamline our processes a bit, and it does allow us to become more efficient. So what it really means is that we're trying to really take a holistic view as a designer, rather than sort of trying to sub-optimise all the little parts. Now, a lot of that does come into manufacturing and to certain construction processes like precasting, modular things and that sort of thing, but sometimes there might be, I won't say a danger, but just maybe a slight blindness in just sub-optimising a small part rather than trying to look at the whole. So we try to look at, so in answer to the question, we try and look at the whole view, try and look at it holistically, and we try to articulate that as well as we can. And that's really difficult, because as we know, this game is contested, it's political, and there's a lot of big personalities in it. I've always said that every project has got one shouter in it. In every large project I've done, there's always one shouter, and you've got to deal with that. We focus on the concept, and then with the quality thing, what we've found too in our practice is that when we've looked at all our risks of things that go out, to problems you might have on site, to design issues, to rework that we do in the office, it all comes down to the concept. So we've spent a lot of time focusing, working on the concept design so you be prepared by one engineer, review, kicked around, to try and look at what is it trying to perform, what are the loads we've used, how do you put it together? Are there stages where it might be unstable? Are there movement issues and all that sort of thing? So we then try to communicate that. Once we've got that, communicate that with the client. Then it goes out into the process. We try and keep it simple as a way of dealing with those issues of cost and quality. I might comment though that the reduction in costs can be a boost to innovation, or it can hinder it. I mean, it might hinder it in that you're not prepared to take risks, or it might force you to find new processes and methods. That's a bit of a two-edged sword. And just on a purely selfish note, I might comment that engineers help that process, or don't hinder that process by our fee cutting. And we're all guilty of that. So there's a lot of those sort of competing issues, but I think focusing on the concept and trying to look at the totality of it, and then trying to argue that is the way I see of answering that question.
Yep, fantastic. Thanks, Simon. Other comments? I'm sure everybody's got many views that could go on for some time on this topic.
I think the production in 3D modelling has really been a quite transformative piece since, probably people of our vintage graduated from university, and it's certainly the case that it allows you to produce quite fantastic things with less people involved, and there are efficiencies out of that. But the fees involved in for the designers as architects or engineers, compared to the total construction cost and the whole of life cost for projects, are minuscule.
Yep.
And fantastically minuscule when you compare them to, say, percentage fees that someone might get for selling a building that you've just designed and spent
putting
3
a deal
years
together.
to make. So, like, they're quite different things, and sometimes the challenge is is when you easily create these things, think that the production is the outcome, but it's the thinking that's still the fundamental part that we think the service consultancies can provide to that. We need to make sure that we don't lose that, and somehow we have to continue to encourage clients to understand that thing. For us as architects, unfortunately from time to time we use that fantastic capability of this modelling. Instead of making a more efficient production process, we just assume that we can make crazier things and that we can sort of document them in a way. And so from time to time, I think for us the responsibility is to work out what is the best way to use these tools and better outcomes, considerations of sustainability, considerations of manufacturing, delivery and things. So rather than all of their possibilities, maybe a subset of those possibilities.
I think we spend a role, probably a big part of our careers, in that triangle, trying to balance cost, time and quality. And it's not easy to get it right and meet customer expectations at times. The one thing I would support wholeheartedly is that if you invest up front, and it maybe feels like a cost, but where the industry works together, we're talking about architects, we're talking about engineers, we're talking about contractors, when you use the tools that we've discussed and we work collaboratively, then I think the cost, although it's an investment up front, I think you get a better outturn cost, and I think the quality is looked after because the thinking's gone in at the start. So it is a challenge, but for me, the investment at the front end is the thing that really delivers the cost target that you're looking for at the end. So that would be my observation.
And a sensible procurement method as well to try and allow that to happen. I think we'll probably touch on that later, but that's key. There's a drive to try and save the minuscule design costs up front, or slice a little bit off them, and push it down the line to the contractor during the build stage. And it's a false hope really to achieve anything there.
Sorry, you were going to say something, Yvonne?
Sure, I think over the years, if we all look back, it is that upfront cost that keeps being considered like a burden. And I think if there was an understanding by the end user and the clients of like whole life consideration, which I mentioned, but also that is it that the designer group don't sell that strong enough that, an end user or a client, they want a fully compliant building that they can then have full confidence in, that has assessed it against all codes. They want all that, but then is it that the designer group are not selling that strongly enough to state that there is a benefit realisation in that at the end? And I actually wonder if that's not where, as a weakness, the industry hasn't gone. And I do say weakness because I think it is something that, if we all know that something's planned right up front, and a lot of times, I would say cost sits in time. People see time and they're worried about time. If you spend the time at the front of the project, then a lot of your issues as you go through will have already been resolved. And I do think that there is benefit in the design group and in the entire design team selling that to clients strongly.
Could I play devil's advocate on that for a second, Yvonne? Is it that maybe the designers, the architects, the engineers, etc., aren't selling it enough, or is it that there's maybe an education piece for the end users as much as anything? Now you might say that those two things are a distinction without a difference, but I probably view them slightly differently.
Yeah, and I think they both have there is giant distinction between. I call out that when the research for the building confidence report went, I'm sure that team went out. If you look at some of the real call outs in that was around, focusing on what is happening at a design stage, ensuring compliance all the way, and looking at things like products and design and the process of design. So I think it's been called out now. I think there's an opportunity, whether it was introduced or not, whether some of those recommendations actually become part of the everyday. I think this is an opportunity because that report really gives the designers an opportunity to say this is a really, really important part of our industry, and this is the starting point. This is the foundation, and I think that's the
Yeah, and that really ties back to what we were talking about in our first question, that it's an opportunity for the industry to really drive the future and the move towards a big, strong focus on that quality element.
So one of the things that we look at is a design for delivery. It's one of the philosophies that sort of underpins everything we do at Robert Bird Group. So it's always been front and centre to what we do, and the interaction is then with the consultant team and the contractor as early as possible.
Yep.
And I think by having that conscious look at how this project can be delivered, and often that requires a deeper understanding of what's available, you know, what's the workforce skill level, what materials are available, you know, what's the financial structure of the companies that are trying to deliver these. And unless you do look at it holistically and bring all of that methodology together, I think you really can't get the efficiencies that we're talking about. You know, because I was talking to a fellow today, many years ago we did the redevelopment of the Adelaide Oval, and he said it was immensely complicated job, but it was a stadium that was built in 2 years. You know what I mean? And they don't get built in 2 years. But the effort that was put in by that particular team was enormous.
Yeah.
But every problem that came up, they were ready to address it. You know, and these sort of things I think are really what we all should be looking at. Not all jobs go well, and they can't go well. It's how you respond to the bumpy road. You know?
Challenges that arise in any project at different points.
Exactly.
Maybe part of it's a language thing too. I mean, part of what I mentioned, what Yvonne mentioned, is communication of what we're trying to do. Sometimes when we speak to non-engineers, it's difficult for them to understand what we're saying. Honestly, we spend a lot of time with literacy with our young engineers. Like, how do you write something? You know, I mean, are you writing a technical specification that's going to be thorough and precise and that sort of thing, or are you writing a marketing letter where you've got to get into someone's head?
Yeah, sell it.
And it's a completely different tone.
Yeah.
That sort of switch is different. And if you think about, you know, you might have done a concept design and you had all these guys in the hole designing, coming out with all their footings, beams, blah, blah, blah. Here's the concept design, and to get them to jump out of that and then sell that is quite a difficult thing. It's a bit of a mindset thing, because the effort to actually produce a lot of these concept designs, right, the upfront work, is taxing. It's hard. It's difficult. You know, that's why not many people do it. And then to jump out of that and sell it, you think, oh, gee, I've finished all this. You know, can't they just see that? Well, they can't.
I've got to the end of it now. Don't make me sell it as well.
But that is an issue.
Yep.
And that's a profession-wide issue, I think. Some people are very good at it, some not so good. Some of our best designers aren't, so maybe we sort of acknowledge that and find the right people that can do that sort of thing. But it would go a long way in educating end users.
Yeah. So that then maybe it's a skills mix within any particular organisation, possibly.
Also, I think too, with that too, we're a fragmented profession. We've got very big players, like Robert Birds, or we've got small players like us, you know, small things. So our relative influence with that sort of thing is different. Our, you know, capability to adjust fees and things is different too. So that comes across differently. So in being fragmented, we're not like a very cohesive thing. So that is part of the issue as well, and it will always be there. So it just needs to be worked through.
Yep.
I think it's good the challenge when we design, because I think we all should be challenged, and I guess something that we get challenged by as contractors is procurement that runs late, particularly in the government space. It runs late, but dates have been committed. And when things run late, things get compromised, and that thing we talked about a moment ago about how important quality and cost, that relationship between the two, and the investment up front, as soon as dates get missed, it gets passed down the line. I think suddenly design needs to be cut a little bit quicker, and politicians love to see projects out on site, shovel ready is that phrase that we hear all the time. The project hasn't really started until we're pushing dirt or pouring concrete. It's not true. We've just talked about it. The real hard work is done before we get to the field, before we get onto the site, and before we strike a blow, and that isn't always recognised.
Yep, and as you get closer to those end dates, the pressure starts ratcheting up more and more if it's taking longer, and it gets a lot harder.
And that pressure spreads across everybody.
Absolutely.
Upwards, downwards, across the...
Yep. Absolutely. Excellent. Okay, the next question is for Paul from Blytanner. Virtual project sites have become a rapidly growing reality. What do you see as the future opportunities for them and challenges for them going forward? And what particular pluses or pros and cons does it have with issues of quality?
Thank you. I think we've all, this last year, we've all adopted a whole heap of new working methods, ways of communicating, Teams, Zoom, all those sorts of things. So that's been an opportunity, but it's been relatively easily adopted, an easy win. Local governments have moved off-site all of their staff, which is a huge number of people, relatively easily. The IT stood up, the IT infrastructure stood up well. That's all worked. I think the real opportunity is beyond virtual space, but also how we work together as an industry. So architects, engineers, builders, clients. We've touched on digital engineering and model sharing, and we're working on a project at the moment which is BIM 360. It's a portal-based model upload format. Every consultant has got a basic benchmark of BIM protocol they've got to operate to, and there's no hiding. You've got to put your toe to the line, and there's clash detection and feedback, and it's all run by the contractor. So the contractor's pushing this hard. It's a very fast-track program, and it's a fantastic opportunity, and it's working well. So that's an opportunity that feeds into early subcontractor discussions. We're flagging materials that aren't readily available, something that's more acute this year as well. Yep. COVID. Absolutely. Supply chain interruptions. So that's then feeding back straight into the design, and we can't source this size column, so we've got to go and find this size, etc., etc. So that's happening very quickly, and that shouldn't be a virtual site. It should be a norm, really. So that's something we can adopt. Challenges have been, particularly from our point of view, we've got a number of projects in Hobart at the moment, complex facade projects, managing the site inspection phase of those, water testing through all those formats, Zoom, Teams, etc. It's difficult. So nothing replaces that physical visit to site and inspection. I think an important takeaway of all of that, and we've kind of touched on working through challenges and bumpy roads, but key for me is relationships. Is strong relationships for all the stakeholders involved, whether it's government, whatever format of procurement, the consultants, the client, the builder. That basic relationship is supported by a virtual world, but it's face to face. It's sitting down and sketching through ideas and drawings. At the same time, working through challenges and issues as they arise, and they always will. So all of these virtual tools fit around that and support that, but the key is the working relationship, I think.
And do you think that's harder through the virtual sites, or do you think we've all, over the last little while, become pretty accustomed to it and will be easier going forward?
As we've mentioned, as a few other panellists have mentioned, we're engineers and architects, but we are predominantly conditioned to solve problems. So if we have to adopt a new technology to solve a problem, we do it readily. So it's not a big hurdle, something you might have to work at a little bit harder to talk to everybody in the office and go around and have a conversation on Teams or whatever format. But the key thing is that you're relating and you're talking and you're communicating and you're solving problems. That's the key.
And it's not just restricted to our profession. There is a value in the face-to-face. Zooms and that is good. I mean, even before I came here this afternoon, looking at a job just around the corner, had to arrange it so that people who were normally out on alternate days come in on the same day so they can do the job.
Sorry, right. Yep.
So you've got that interaction. So yes, we can manage that and adjust it and that sort of thing, but I don't think that could ever be replaced. It's a big statement, I know, but there's still something human about scribbling on paper.
And it's important, there's a lot of interaction that happens face to face, so we shouldn't strive to replace it. I don't think there's a lot of technology that can support it and make us more efficient and the process smoother.
Yep.
But it's a key, it's a very fundamental part of what we do.
And that'll be a question with AI in 10, 20 years time.
Yep. Which is a question I know has been coming through as well, so we might get to that at the end.
It's a little bit cultural too, this contact on projects, because we've got an office in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong probably was as prepared as anyone in the world for a pandemic, having dealt with SARS for 10 years. So that the attitude there on most of the projects was that people would be on site, that you'd be there, and you might have a mask on and you get your temperature done and you get checked and all, but there was a real idea that you were face to face as much as possible.
Yep.
And it's very different to what we did here in Australia for several months, but it was the expectation there. And then in the Middle East, it's obviously different again. Where the pandemic issues were stronger, the virtual design delivery was really the only way projects were moving forward.
Yep.
So you had global projects with engineers from Australia or all over the place, all other places around the world, all interacting. And it works. I think the one thing we've proven is that there is a way to make virtual project delivery work.
Yep.
Through this pandemic, I'm particularly proud of the way our industry responded. We were incredibly fortunate to keep going through most of it. So that was a big show of resilience to our industry and people working in it. Before the pandemic, we had 11% people working flexibly, and obviously that skyrocketed up to almost everyone, or a high percentage of everyone who wasn't people that work on site. And our people really craved that, even before, whilst it was only 11%, people wanted more of it. They wanted flexible working. We're probably one of the least flexible industries going, railway positions at weekends and Christmas and Easter, and fly in, fly out as a way of life for many families. So the opportunity to work flexibly is something people really crave, and I think younger people do as well. They don't necessarily want to live the life I've led. They want something that they can enjoy, a different kind of life. So we've committed to trying to get to 40% as a number when we get back to whatever the new normal looks like. And I don't know whether we'll get there, but we're having a red hot goal. But for me, that's all about the younger people. It's about offering people opportunities, and I think as been discussed, the tools that we can now offer to allow people to be more effective. We will never get away from being a people-based business. That's kind of why I joined it. It's what I enjoy about it, and we'll never lose that. But we can push the boundary a little bit, I think. And if you watch the young people now, they don't interact the way that we did at that age. They just don't. You go into a university refectory, they're all typing away. They're all sitting there, but they're not talking to each other. So we just have to accept, like it, we may not, but that's the way the world's moving, and we're not going to stop it.
Or even remote university learning as a whole nowadays. I think that sooner or later they're probably not even in there.
Well, you can actually create more opportunity by having that. Not having to have physically all the students in the classroom. You can give more opportunity to people.
So I might, being a bit conscious of time, move to the next question. And Yvonne, this one is for you. From a regulatory and accountability perspective, what are the key challenges facing the industry, and what should we implement today to start addressing them?
Thanks. I actually would think our key challenge is community confidence, and I think community has lost some confidence in our industry. That trust by consumers of what they're purchasing is not only compliant with the codes and the legislation, but that it responds to the perception of what the clients now see as value for money. And whether it's a personal investment or a commercial venture, there is an expectation with clients will have, and the challenges to the industry has always been to find a balance to comply with the codes, standards and the regulations in which there is a requirement to comply, while still delivering on the client expectations for return on investment, whole of life, new design expectations, the innovation and the speed of delivery. And I think there is huge expectations on the industry, and there's also significant regulation and codes compliance, and that does increase. The real challenge is to see how the industry can actually balance, you know, in a world that has come to expect more for less, whether it lies with time, product capacity, longevity or innovation. You know, I guess acknowledging the challenges faced by the industry, it does not limit the accountability for those in that chain of design responsibility or construction responsibility for compliance with legislation, code standards, whether it be products or overall. So, you know, the role of the regulator can assist here, and that's really by providing very clear guidelines and consistency. It does start to give a even starting base, and we've had some challenges with that even starting base. But as regulators, we are able to give a really standard starting base. Now, I'm going to say it's, and I keep saying starting base because compliance with legislation, codes and standards is a minimum requirement to which there's a requirement for adherence to, and it is by absolutely no means an ultimate standard. So I guess, you know, there'll be a lot of different opinions on how to address these challenges facing both the design teams and the construction teams. But if I point to the Building Confidence Report recommendations, and I seem to be always doing this, but there was a lot of work done around that, and the purpose, you know, a purpose of a suite of independent measures designed to improve the effectiveness of the compliance and enforcement systems of the building industry in Australia. So whether or not these recommendations actually are considered by relevant authorities generally, future introduction, they do, I think, highlight the industry and the consumer concerns, and they speak broadly to a number of proposed solutions, and some of those solutions are that they spoke clearly to were around bolstering the foundations of building control systems, improving mechanisms for design and construction acceptance during the building design delivery phase, strengthening compliance and enforcement practices, so obviously that is straight to the regulation and actually ensuring that's set. You know, recommendations 13 to 16 are specific around the design acceptance within the building delivery phase in particular. They seek to improve the standard of compliance and the standards in compliance and designs, including those submitted as part of the building permit application process and submitted in relation to design variations during the construction phase. And I think additionally, there is a strong need outside of the recommendations, there's a strong need for clear design and to consider the agreed performance outcomes of the building and the structure, which will then drive performance requirements of materials, quality requirements, longevity of product choice and future product value, and most of all, design considerations. So it's clear that part of the recommendations focus on the role of the regulator through registration and licensing, setting minimum standards for continual professional development and auditing of buildings under construction. But there is a huge focus, I think, that could come out of the recommendations and relevant authorities could consider that will drive that actual accountability perspective that will assist in addressing some of the challenges for industry. And I'm sure I'm going to be challenged.
You never know, Yvonne, you never know.
Are there any comments, thoughts from the panel here with me at all? You might get away with it, Yvonne.
Oh my, I can't believe that. Does that mean that they all agree with me?
I'll let the six of you take that up at a different time. It actually probably ties in with the next question in part in any event, because Yvonne, obviously you were answering and focusing on quality and from a regulatory perspective, and you mentioned that compliance with standards should be is the minimum requirement. And the next question, which is for Richard, is this: improved quality of building materials and product has been a massive topic of conversation in the industry over the last little while. What strategies, and here we're not talking regulatory and accountability, regulatory strategies, could be implemented to ensure improved quality outcomes?
Yeah, thank you. So when you say that, I expect many listening will immediately think about particular materials and probably fire combustible materials when we think about these issues, and it's a really large mess that the industry is sort of working through, and unfortunately it's involved significant tragedy, and it's possibly that tragedy and the critical nature of that may be able to recalibrate some of the thinking about selection of materials. Certainly will take a long time to work through, but it does it does focus on the little dance that happens in making of buildings, I think, between client and client expectations, product suppliers, specifiers, and maybe the architects or the engineers and the contractors. Mm-hmm. And it can be quite torturous getting to something that is, a value outcome. And then there can be other subsequent dances after selections are made. And I think, we're talking about considerations of how the overall project delivery might affect some considerations of materials. Mm-hmm. I think there are responsibilities for all parties, certainly from the architect, specifier, or engineer. It's really to understand at the heart of what these materials are about and to be quite clear, and the onus is absolutely on the specifier. There's been goodwill, there's been bad will, there's been misunderstandings, there's been vagaries, and from time to time there's clearly been substitutions of materials that have misled all parties. But I think there is an opportunity to think about what it is about, what is the role of the architect or engineer, and I think it has, certainly in our industry, focused on what it is that we're doing, why we're doing these things. It's been able to make us think about considerations of sustainability, other elements that might be involved in material choice, moving beyond just value and moving beyond an expression of materials or facadism, and looking at more deeply about how these things go together. So not necessarily an answer, but identifying the challenges that we certainly face.
With material selection, we've now got analysis capability to look at materials quite differently, to find out how much more you can get out of them, and I think that can change our approach to design.
Yep.
Most of the approach from the structural point of view is about performance and compliance, for regulatory requirements. That you've got to meet safety requirements, you've got to meet vibration requirements and deflection, and that's a big part of it. But you can also look at how materials are used structurally and compositely. And these are sort of things we probably don't have time in any particular project to actually evaluate. It's almost like you have to have this continual background of research and happening to push the boundaries so that you're ready for the next change. But not many people, and we're not really building buildings very differently in this environment than what we did 10, 20, 30 years ago. And we're not building the buildings any quicker. So where is it? Where do we go to make this change? And is the change going to be built around people accepting something different, and that's the other part. The expectations of people about performance of buildings are rising all the time. They don't want buildings that are hot. They don't want buildings that don't have good views. And I think, as much as we're saying we can't build as quickly, but building differently from the type of building or the outcome for the user, but we could be doing more. And whether regulatory measures make that happen, or whether it's the demand from the public, or it's a government initiative, it's a very difficult thing to make the change. And I'm not sure when it can happen.
Potentially interplay across all of those factors, maybe.
Well, it really does need that, and who can drive that?
Troy, one of the things we know is around boundary conditions and what are the boundary conditions of that? And if the understanding of a product is its conditions of which the product has been tested on the bounds of where it can be used, that allows that there's a repeatable construction without use, and areas that, a direct correlation between lab performance and on-site performance can be established by boundary conditions rather than a set, it's used for this. I think we need to start to look at what are the conditions it can be used for and what are the conditions we know it can't be. And then if we look at materials under those conditions, that's going to give us a better quality at the end of the day, because it is actually allowing us to not directly pigeonhole a particular material, but in our innovation to actually look broader at where will it perform and where won't it perform.
Any other comments, thoughts from the panel before we move to the last of the set questions for the evening? Okay, so we'll move to the last of the set questions. I'm well advised that there's been a large number of questions and queries flooding through from the audience, so thank you very much for that. And as promised, we'll endeavour to cover a good sample size of those. But the last question for Nick from Robert Bird Group. It's been suggested that Australia has previously been slow to adopt digital technologies and transformation. Do you think that this has or is changing due to the impacts of COVID-19?
Well, I think it's quite an interesting question, because it's something we've all evolved through this period. We've grown through this idea of digital transformation because we had to move that way, because of the remote nature of a lot of the projects we deliver, that we adopted these things as an industry. Engineers, the engineering construction industry, adopted it very quickly, and we moved through it. So whether Australian society has adopted it as well as they should have is probably harder to really put a definition on. But I would think that it's a measure of how well we have adopted it, was the fact that when COVID came in and the need to work remotely was the only way the economy could keep going, was that most businesses adopted it very quickly, and most workers adopted the opportunity to work that way for the benefits that they were given, and the fact that they could spend more time with their family was a real bonus for a lot of people. So I think the Australian economy in its own way was very resilient because of the adoption of digital transformations that had occurred over a long period of time, since the early 90s, and that when COVID came, we were ready to respond. And I think we really picked up and ran with most projects to keep them on track. And we found that we're involved with a large infrastructure project here in Brisbane. There was a lot of concern because it's a big government job that we wouldn't be able to meet the requirements of the design. And we actually exceeded everyone's expectations and the program because we were prepared to adopt this digital transformation or implement it. So I'm very confident that we're on the right track.
We found it a lot easier than we thought it would be.
Yeah.
There was this terrible catastrophe at the beginning, and it also has forced us to deal with some of the working flexibility issues that Paul's talked about earlier on. And we sort of, well, for our organisation, just sort of reaching that sort of hybrid type of model, which is working with people, and it's probably becoming more productive.
Nothing like a potential crisis to make us address issues that we were happy to kick down the road.
Well, and you know, we need that occasionally. Yeah. We don't need the pandemic, but we need the ability, sometimes the ability to adapt our practices and find a better way. Some good comes out of it.
I don't think we've been slow. I don't think Australia has been slow typically to adopt.
I was hoping someone was going to have a different view.
Yeah, I just don't think. I've spent approximately half my career in the UK and the last 12 years here in Australia, and I don't think Australia has been, the industry here is any slower in adopting technology. As Simon said, we've had to do it because of a set of circumstances, and it's happened seamlessly pretty much, and we've responded, and it's the only way we can keep going as individual businesses and as an industry. So, yeah.
In my mind, there are two answers. One is that we're able to make buildings now with these technologies that we couldn't have conceived of 25 years ago. Yep. Think about the Queensland Country Bank Stadium, and every element of that building was analysed to make it more efficient. So 25 years ago, all of the columns might have been the same dimension, they might have been the same height. We've used computer technology to make sure all of those are working at their most efficient, and it's created the outcome that there is. I think on the other hand though is the consideration of disruptive matters, and that's where you think you're doing the greatest thing you can do, and then all of a sudden from out of the blue comes a disruptor. And you know, I think our industry is susceptible to those considerations, the way you might think about taxi and Uber. You know, we haven't had that complete shift in terms of delivery of construction. So although our design and documentation is a world apart from 25 years ago, as we've discussed today, the making of things is almost exactly the same. And so there is that potential opportunity and also threat to the way our industry works and the way things are built. It could come from out of the sky. It could be these ideas that concrete trucks come around and pump out buildings and they assemble, you know, on site by the press of a button. These things are out there. They might be challenges that we faced and could be tomorrow.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's been an upsurge in the use of the tools during the pandemic. I think we've certainly used a few new ones within Land Work, and they've been fairly successful. Good uptake really early. And I'd probably argue that some of the existing tools we've been using, we probably haven't developed. 3D modelling, 4D modelling has been around for a while, but are we as an industry using it as efficiently and as widely as we could be? Probably not. And there's development beyond that is obviously out there in the market at the moment. I think the other thing that's come as part of this is just some of the simple digital changes. I'm not saying the contracts instead, that's all being done digitally now. I don't think we were doing that as much as we certainly are now, and I'm sure every business is the same. So little simple things like that have played in now and are actually now normal, although they weren't 6 months ago. So I think we have incrementally improved, but I suggest there's still some way to go.
Yep. If there's no other comments on that topic, I'll now hand over to Steve Burton to come and pose a sample of the questions to the panel that we've received from the audience.
Thanks, Troy. And the reason we do it this way is because with an audience this big, what we've found is that it's difficult to manage the influx of questions whilst trying to do the panel discussion at the same time. And it has been the case tonight that there has been a number of questions that have been received during the panel's discussion, which is great. It shows a great level of engagement with what everyone's been saying. I think there's some recurring themes in those questions. I think the top 3 recurring themes are environment, AI and COVID. I think probably no surprise based on what you've been talking about. I should also say, keep putting those questions through, even though we said do it as the panel was talking. I think people are naturally conditioned to ask more questions during the Q&A part, so keep sending them through and we can look at them as they come. But dealing with those themes, and perhaps I'll start with AI, and I might ask Paul Easingwood about this. I think it picks up on some of the things Richard was saying in response to the last question. There are two questions here, one from Mario in Western Australia and one from Brendan in New South Wales, and I think they show the spectrum of concern about this particular issue. It's two questions, they're really the same, but they're asked in a different way. Mario says, do engineers have a future in an increasing automated and artificially intelligent world? And Brendan asks, how long until AI takes all our jobs? So really driving at the same issue. So I just wonder if I could get your thoughts on that.
To answer both questions, the second one first, I don't think we need to worry. Yes, there's a place for AI and there's a place for increased digital assistance in what we do. Simon touched on this earlier, there's also a place for a big place for experience, project experience that you pick up through your career, to stand back and look at a set of drawings and a design and go, actually that doesn't look right, or we can do something a little bit more efficiently here. No doubt AI will come into, and we have links, two-way links between design models and documentation models, parametric modelling, and there's definitely efficiencies and there's a place for all of that. But there's also no replacement for experiential judgment or a judgment call on a particular issue. So I think, it will all meld into a combination, and some projects will be more suited to a almost fully automated design process potentially, but other projects, rehabilitation, heritage, adaptive reuse projects, sustainability, looking at different material options. There's a lot of thinking we do as engineers without realising what we're doing. A lot of decision making as we go. So that's crucial to the industry and the betterment of the industry going forward.
What it can do is it takes away a lot of the computation, so we can step back a bit more and concentrate on the pure engineering. How do we put this together? How do we assemble all these different things? In a sense, it's a bit medieval. You know, it's controlling all that data and knowledge down there, and we can sit back and concentrate on the pure engineering. That's one way to look at it.
What do you think, Richard? I know as a lawyer we get asked this question all the time, and we always tend to respond with, no, it'll be a long time before the lawyers will need to be replaced with robots, and we can't get accused of being a bit protectionist, and that's not really the reality. Do you think that the robots are coming in anytime soon, or is that a bit overblown?
I think there will be some sense of that. I think probably at different ends of the scale of projects. I think the parts that we have relatively little input on, architects are involved in only about 5% of the residential projects in Australia. So I think these simple, notionally simple house and land solutions, it's really going to be some, I think, automation considerations about how those things together. On larger projects, I think because we're dealing with human problems are significantly larger than a brief that might be able to be put into a program for response. It's nuanced, and as Paul's saying, even if something can spit something out, there's a role in engagement with client, with delivery of these things that would be very difficult to replace. So I think there's consideration of wisdom, and there's consideration of complexity of problems and nuance and human condition that would be very hard to respond.
In regard to the environment, and I'll pick up on in the introduction, Paul Milne. You talked about the fact that we use a lot of energy. You said we use a lot of landfill. We've got questions here from Sky in New South Wales and also from Rebecca in Western Australia. And those questions are really about how we can be more carbon neutral, which is quite a specific question, and happy for you to address that. But more generally, how do you think how effective has the industry been at meeting the growing environmental challenge, and what can we do? What can it do moving forward to better meet it?
I think education is the first part. I mean, the introduction of sustainability in our industries, let's be honest, been relatively recent. So I think people with my age and experience are probably having to learn a lot more from younger people about what can be done, because I think we have dwelled in existing practices for such a long time. So there's a big education piece, and I think it is happening, and I think people are becoming more knowledgeable. So when you look at the tools and techniques that are deployed in our projects now, we have to be thinking about the long-term sustainability of the building materials that we're using, of how they'll be disposed, at what carbon footprint the project has or is expected to have. Clients are demanding it in terms of the buildings that they want to inhabit. Things like Green Star and ISCA ratings and things like that are now around, and contractors like us, we have to take account of that. So it's definitely a big education for the industry, and it's a big challenge at the moment. And it's certainly something that people are more conscious of, and I think younger people are more aware of, quite rightly, that construction needs to be seen as a more environmentally friendly and sustainable industry. So there's quite a bit of work to do on that. Sorry to say, but we do a lot of education going around now that I think will help us.
One other view is that, we deal with very high energy, inherent energy products. I remember as a student going to the Adelaide Brighton Cement Works, I can still remember the heat coming off the kiln that was going around. So maybe another way to think about it might be to say, well, let's take, these are, in a sense, precious materials because they consume a lot of energy, but let's make them really durable. Maybe we design for longer and adaptive uses. Because they are durable materials.
It's such a big decision in Australia as well, because we talk a lot about our government projects and that infrastructure boom we're talking about. We're a country full of minerals, different types of coal, iron ore, gas, fossil gas that was mined recently in Queensland. So it is always a heated debate. Elections are fought over it. So energy policy is really important, and I think people do want and expect to see some real clear decision making around that on how Australia's energy policy is going to be determined, pushed forward.
Okay. Question around COVID, which is one I'll direct at Richard. Could you share some of the better practices that you've seen, and perhaps each of the panel could share their own experiences, some of the better practices you've seen brought into place, the better innovation as a consequence of COVID, something that's really surprised you in terms of the way that it's worked?
Well, if I think about the Zoom world, I'm sure we're all aware of this, but the ability to share a screen collectively and everyone looking at the same thing, the ability for everyone to participate and engage in the making of something, has really produced a buy-in and a cohesive relationship between client, contractor and consultant team. So that even though we may be in separate rooms, it seems to me from time to time that we might be all looking at one thing much more closely. So that's one thing.
What about other people on the panel?
Well, it hasn't really surprised me, but it has been very well adopted. That the only way you can participate in a project of any scale now is to be on a virtual COVID because of COVID on a virtual platform. And it's working. I can't see any way that we're going to change this, and it's a kind of a democratic process because a lot of people get a chance to talk about a design that normally wouldn't, because you wouldn't even be in the room because the room's not big.
Teams Zoom experience, but the ones that if you ask what do you really miss, it's those sort of collaborative sessions where you're all working together on something. And we've been using Mural, and I'm sure a lot of businesses have as well, and I found that such a good experience, particularly when it's being stewarded by someone who can operated particularly well, breakout rooms, and you're doing your post-it notes, you're bringing it all back together again, and you actually found the efficiency in doing that, which I wouldn't believe before it happened, but the efficiency of doing that in a virtual sense, you were able to go in and out of rooms really quickly, and obviously you were not looking at what other people were doing, you were doing your own thing, and then you bring it together virtually. So that was a big surprise to me. I never expected it to be as productive and as fun and as efficient as it actually turned out to be.
I think the flex, sorry, Mark.
I concur that I think the really important thing that I've seen come out of this is that everybody gets an equal voice when it's actually managed well with meetings or any input. And there are a lot more people at the table. You might just have taken one person to the table, or you should take 2 or 3 to the table, and you can be across Australia or across the world, and it can still have input. So I think there's been real benefit in what's come out, in that you can actually work much better as a team because more voices are heard, not just the loud ones.
So Paul, you going to say?
On a different sort of theme of what's positive that has come out of COVID, and Paul touched on this earlier. We're a small business of 50 people, predominantly in Brisbane, and a small office in Sydney. But the ability for people to work flexibly away from the office and use all these tools, and we're all broadly of a similar generation, so it's more the younger engineers, younger people in the office that have grasped this opportunity, and it's now a hybrid system of in the office and out of the office, and it's working really, really well. It's a real positive, and it's a zero cost almost to a business. And it's a definite benefit. So I think that is a positive we should keep hold of, and it should be rolled out through the industry as a standard way of working, and I'm sure it will be.
There's a question from Nirav. I might direct this one to you, Nick. He says, engineers, architects and designers are not necessarily good delivery managers. How do we create a better awareness of project delivery issues in this group so that projects can be delivered more efficiently?
I mean, that's a very good question, because often we get, as engineers, or you get bound up in some of the smaller detail rather than the bigger picture of delivery, which is why as a company we've always had that focus. So you really have to have, within that any of those team environments, you need to have someone who has the capability to pull together a design team. And I don't think that changes whether you're working virtually or you're working within an office space. So a lot of times we now rely on the contractor to provide that impetus. But I think there's, within all of our organisations, there's still the people that do lead. And I think there's no replacement for it. That you have to have a very strong leadership for any design or any project delivery.
Are there any other views on that in the panel? How do we create a better better awareness of project delivery issues amongst engineers, architects and designers? Or maybe you want to tell me you disagree with the proposition completely, that they're not necessarily good delivery managers.
We send our young engineers to site. Mm-hmm. You've designed this, now go out and have a look at it.
Yeah.
Talk to the people who are putting it together. I mean, it starts
right
right
at the beginning. Who's the lead consultant now? There was always a clear line who was the lead consultant, and now that doesn't seem to be quite as clear.
I think the question, if I understand it, is about project delivery.
I think it's around practicality, from what I can gather. I think what's being suggested is that there's a lack of awareness of some of the practical issues on site, and sometimes that can get in the road for engineers, architects and designers. There's a lack of delivery of some project delivery issues.
I mean, I think when we're at our best as an industry, we've got a blend of skills within the teams. Those that understand design, those that understand architectural issues, and those that understand how to build. certainly from our perspective, and we're more a contractor, the best project delivery people we have in our business know about design, they know about completions and documentation and quality, as well as knowing how to build something. And certainly it's that broad plethora of skills that we certainly try to develop in our project leaders, and I can't imagine that's any different. If you have to deliver a design, I'm sure it's the case where construction experience is relevant as well.
I'm reminded of actually something that happened at Laing O'Rourke, where I think Laing O'Rourke took the position to say architects are different to engineers, are different to contractors. They come with completely different agendas and different skills. And what's required is for people to understand that difference and to be empathetic to each other's sort of drives and work out a collaborative way to do it. So I do think it's the case that, you know, we do have a different skill set and sometimes a different innate understanding of things. So this idea about a human relationship, an engagement and a collaborative sense where we're all working together for a single outcome, and sometimes project delivery methods are anathema to that, is a really important lesson. I think we try and get all of our team to understand their views aren't precious and singular and the only driving thing that's appropriate for a project.
I think something that made me think as well, I don't think it happens as much as it did, but certainly when I was a young engineer in the UK, to get chartered for a contractor, I had to go and get design experience, and I couldn't get it with a contractor, so I was reciprocated into a design organisation for a year, and obviously those moves were reciprocated where designers would come and work for a contractor for a year, and although I wasn't particularly good at it, I got a great appreciation of the skills that was in pulling the design together, and it served me well in my career from that point, and I don't know if we do enough of that.
A question here from Rivin. He asks, with this era of innovation and technology, what does the panel think about having a design team on one side of the globe and a construction site on the other side of the globe? How effective this is? How effective do you think this could potentially be? Is there any room for this? Is there anything like this happening at the moment? Maybe start with you, Paul.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a minor involvement with a UK consultant at the moment for an infrastructure project in New South Wales. It's the tools are there, as we've talked about and mentioned earlier in the evening. So it's perfectly feasible. It can even work to the benefit across time zones. You can have continuous design. I'm sure Nick, with their organisation, we've experienced this, but. So it's achievable, and then it still comes down to relationships and how you manage that transfer of design to construction through both the contract and physically manage that process on site. But it does happen, and it's perfectly achievable.
So one of the things that it allows you to do is to leverage the benefit of experience, because you can use the experience of someone in your London office to deliver a project in Adelaide using the labour force in Hong Kong, and it all does work together. So I think this is really the platform we've got and the opportunity we've got to successfully deliver projects globally. And Australians are very good at it. I mean, there's a natural sort of ability that Australians have to get out and solve problems, and I look across the teams that I work with around the world, we do stand out. I mean, there's something about the way we approach things, the way we're trained, and the confidence that we go into projects. It does make it's real and different.
Do you think we're effective as an industry at marketing ourselves internationally?
Well, it's interesting. I was doing a project in Kuwait. In Saudi Arabia, and the guy said, "You don't promote yourself enough." And you think, well, in amongst what you're trying to do, you sometimes lose sight of the fact that you should be pushing our barrow a bit more. But it is a problem we do have. We don't realise how good the work is that we're doing, and how relevant it is globally. So we can do more. Just got to be more confident.
I think that's a natural disposition of an engineer, is not to feel comfortable standing up and blowing your own trumpet.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's something we can work on.
Sure. Okay. Question from Paul about regulators, and it is how does, and this is one obviously for Yvonne, how does a regulator contribute to rather than stifle innovation?
I actually think by setting clear guidelines, and I think if people, and yes, there's always the consideration that it's perceived to be stifling, but I think when you set and the regulators don't actually set the standards, it is actually a team that work on standards, and it's the ABCB that actually set what will be the NCC, and many other people all contribute to that, and that's industry. The regulator's job is really to regulate what has been made, not to create it. But how do they do that fairly? I think it's fairness. I think it's that procedural fairness has to occur. It's setting clear guidelines of expectations, and that an industry understands that. I think when there's not a clear guideline, it's hard to work with that. So I think the regulator's role is to make sure there's a clear guideline.
Sure, thanks Yvonne. Does anyone want to touch on that, or are we still everyone too afraid of Yvonne to talk about the regulator stifling innovation? I'm happy if we leave it there. I think I'm conscious of time. I'll ask one more question, and I'll direct it to you, Simon. It's about it's from Mark in Western Australia, and he asks, do you think our engineers in their roles provided with enough room to innovate day to day in their day-to-day jobs, and how could this improve potentially?
It's a tough question.
Tough question, yeah.
I mean, to innovate, you probably need to find some space somewhere to think of a problem differently. And that's difficult with normal work pressures. So I'd probably suggest most innovation doesn't occur in the office. You'll probably program your head solving problems and things like that, and it'll come to you when you're going for a run or having a shower or doing something else on the weekend. So there's obviously not perhaps formal space for innovation, but if you put enough inputs in there, it'll happen if you're open to it.
Sure.
I don't know if that answers the question. But,
no, I think it's a good answer, because you're saying it's about finding that time, and it's about finding that headspace. And I know that we see images of, for example, Google, where you have they have bean bags and ping pong tables and all these kind of designated areas that are supposed to promote thought waves and innovation, supposedly.
I think it's usually when you're doing something else, because you'll see something else that may trigger a connection. I mean, in innovation, I suppose, is finding a different pattern. So you're getting some input to find a different pattern or a different way of assembling something, or a different way of looking at a problem, or something like that. Or maybe you even realise that you're solving the wrong problem.
Thanks.
Look, I would say you've got to create an environment where innovation can occur. And I think one of the challenges for this industry at the moment is a lot of companies aren't making money, and that I think will be interesting to many. But when you have an environment where cost is so important and companies are struggling, then everybody just gets pushed a little bit harder, and there is not that environment where people have the opportunity to think, where companies have an opportunity to invest, and where our younger talent is given a
bit of space
to think and a space to think, where you're on a project that's up against deadlines and really difficult cost pressures, and that's where a lot of an industry has been. Adversarial contracts, disputes, and what they see is the people they aspire to be spending half their time with lawyers and discussing claims and projects that have gone too long and companies going to the wall, which has happened. So that's not an environment where innovation is going to succeed. And you know, with this opportunity we have now, these are the kind of things we need to look at, because the opportunity to do things like that is what will attract some of the brightest and youngest people in our industry.
All right. Look, I think we've got through a good sample there of the many questions that have come in. I want to thank everyone for contributing questions, but that's where we'll leave it for our panel discussion. I just want to once again thank all of our panellists for their time and all their insights that they've shared tonight. It's been a truly engaging discussion. So I want to thank Simon Bakusa, Richard Coulson, Paul Milne, Nick Barker, Yvonne Pangilly and Paul Easingwood. Thanks very much. We'd do a round of applause if that was possible, but we won't. And once again, I want to thank Engineer Australia's industry partner, Brickworks Building Products, for making tonight's event possible. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone.